know the Bible as we have it today is God's Word. Before we get into some details, have a quick discussion around your table. What are some reasons you have heard from people as to why they won't accept the Bible as coming from God or having authority? So they may just say, I don't believe it's from God. Or they might say, yes, I believe it's from God and I respect it, but I don't take it as authoritative or as the supreme authority for my life. So quick discussion. Well, when we're thinking about the authority, the inspiration of the Bible, there are three key issues, and these might be the issues that people particularly zoom in on to say we don't accept the Bible, but there are three issues that we need to know about, which actually show us that we can rely on the Bible and that we can have a confidence that it is from God. There's the issue of veracity. So can we know that the biblical documents we have today are true to the originals? So they were written so long ago. How do we know that thousands of years later, what we actually have is the same as what they had 2 or more thousand years ago? Has it been preserved or not? There's the issue of the canon. Who decided which books were in or out? And what standard did they use? So how did they decide, how did they know back then that this book should be in the Bible and this book shouldn't be in the Bible?
Does that mean the people who collectively chose the canon count as inspired, just like the writers of the books?
Yeah. So was how was God involved in that process? Or was he involved? Or was it just, as an objection might be, well, it was just some males who picked certain books because they liked them, and then another popular myth is they then destroyed all the other books that they didn't want in it, which doesn't really work, because how do we know about these other books if they were all destroyed? The third issue is inspiration. So what makes these writings inspired by God? And if they're inspired by God, they are therefore authoritative. If they are from God speaking, then it follows that they must be authoritative for us because we are God's creatures.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question, make a comment on that?
Yep.
Well, that implies that God can't inspire anything that's outside the Bible. If we hold that view, that's what makes them Bible inspired. Then basically that's saying God can't give inspiration to any other writings.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in fact, the word in English, inspired, which that word actually means breathed in, doesn't it? If I say I'm inspired, it means something has come into me. So I have been inspired by God, whereas the word that the Bible uses is actually the breathing out. So really it should be expired by God, but as in, so God breathed out his word is the idea in the Bible. Whereas the word inspiration is actually quite different, because the Bible, there's stories in the Bible of people actually being inspired, because whenever it says Peter filled with the Holy Spirit, that's what that word means. The Spirit is in him. So there is this idea that people can be inspired by God, given his Spirit, but the question is whether that is the same as God breathing out authoritatively his word and giving it to us. Well, let's work our way through each of these. The first one is about the veracity, and here are some valid things that we need to acknowledge are true. So 2,000 years plus years is a long time for any document to be preserved unchanged. Right? That's true. Human fallibility. and dishonesty and conspiracy are realities. So it is the case that documents historically will be altered and changed by human beings as they transmit them, either because they're making errors in copying them, or they have an actual agenda and are trying to change things to deceive people,
Or
right?
try and helpfully fill in the gaps for anyone reading.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, add to it what they think is missing, or try to make it clearer if they think it's hard to understand or whatever. So,
And translate.
yeah, and as we'll see in a moment, that is actually been a factor in the transmission of the scriptures. That human fallibility and weakness has been a part of that transmission of the biblical documents. Misinformation and disinformation are not new. So we hear those two words. There was I think a recent bill in one of the state parliaments, wasn't there, to try and outlaw misinformation and disinformation, to stop people spreading false information as if it were true, right? So it is a valid concern. How can we know that a document written 2,000 years ago has been transmitted faithfully to us today? There are a number of doubts in the modern mind that we may have. For example, we are used to easy and reliable mass duplication of texts. So ever since the printing press, the actual production of printed material has been a lot more reliable, because you don't have to copy out each one by hand. The printer sets it up, provided that it's all checked carefully. Then you can make 10,000 copies and be sure that they're all exactly the same. You may have heard the story of one of the editions of the King James Bible, where the printer double-checked, hopefully, but made an error in Exodus 20. Instead of saying, "Thou shalt not commit adultery," he left out the "not." So there were, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of copies of the Bible were printed that said, "Thou shalt commit adultery." So even...
Sorry, but I'm not... Has anyone actually got one of these copies?
Yes. There are a few. They were recalled and destroyed, but there were a few that did. And there is, I can't remember, there's a museum somewhere where there is actually one of these original, it's called the Evil Bible. Old communication methods, writing and oral, are assumed to be unreliable today. Because, we think, well, 2,000 years later, technology is better. Clearly, 2,000 years ago, it's going to be unreliable because they didn't have as good technology as us. We might even arrogantly say they weren't as smart as us. But that is a modern assumption, that anything old and ancient is less reliable than what is modern. But also, digital and AI technology has lowered trust in transmitted information. Now, I see people posting these amazing images or videos of nature, and I look at them and I think, no, that's AI. AI has produced this incredible creature. So we know that if someone says, "Hey, look at this is real," we're starting to realise, no, you can't always trust that it's real. And globalisation and pluralism has broadened our options for wisdom and truth. So, 500 years ago, if you lived in Europe, you probably would have known nothing about Hinduism or Buddhism or Aboriginal Dreamtime, whatever, right? All you would have known is what you were taught in a Christian society from the scriptures. Now we have access to all scriptures of other religions and other beliefs and philosophies, and so, okay, well, why should Christianity be the prevailing idea, is what people think. So there's some factors that we need to bear in mind. maybe in our minds, but most definitely in the minds of our culture, people in our culture, and those who might be saying, you can't trust or believe the Bible. Now, here's how the popular imagination then thinks that the Bible was passed down. So the originals were written in the 1st century AD for the New Testament, or maybe centuries earlier for the Old Testament. And then a copy was made of that, and then a copy was made of the copy. And with each copy that was made, there were changes and distortions. And then over thousands of years, hundreds of sequential copies, what do we end up with? We end up with all these different versions that have been changed and are very different to what the original was. And if you add to that the fact that Christians have been fighting between themselves for 2,000 years, disagreeing on what doctrine is and so on. There's been biased religious agendas, so a particular scribe might say, I don't like what this is saying, and so they might alter it a bit to suit their particular views. People will say, well, the church has covered things up. They've got these other documents that they didn't allow in the Bible, or they've changed things in the Bible to suit. And now we're at the place where scientific and cultural advancements are telling us that there are many things in the original documents that are clearly untrue anyway, because of what we know about science and so on. And so they say, well, what we have left of our modern Bible is there's no chance of ever knowing what was in the originals. All right, so that's what many people will think of when they think of the Bible being copied and passed down over 2,000 years. In fact, you'll even find academics and scholars promoting this view. So I guess what this scenario would be like is if I gave a message and I whispered it to Russell, and then Russell whispered it to Ray, and we went right around all the way down to Kate, and then Kate wrote down what she heard from Chu, chances are part of the message will be lost in transmission, and it'll be different by the time it gets to Kate. Okay, that's the kind of idea. Well, let's look quickly at what the actual case is. So we have over 25,000 handwritten manuscripts. This is of the New Testament. And in those, 5,800 of them are Greek, and most of the older ones in the 25,000 are the Greek ones. Then kind of around the 4th century onwards, when Latin was kind of the official language of the church, a lot of the Bible was translated into Latin. So we have 10,000 Latin manuscripts and 9,300 from other languages. And that's going right up until the late Middle Ages, until the pivotal moment. Can anyone guess what the pivotal moment was that changed the transmission of these manuscripts by scribes writing them out by hand? The printing press. Yeah, so after the printing press, most of the manuscripts of the Bible don't have these variants because of the reliability of the printing press. So over those 250,000 handwritten manuscripts, that's not the complete New Testament. That's either complete New Testaments or individual books in the New Testament, or fragments of those books, depending on how well the parchment or the papyrus has survived over time. So there are 400,000 variants between just the Greek manuscripts. So across the 5,800 Greek manuscripts, there are 400 differences that can be identified. 400,000, which that sounds terrifying, doesn't it? But that number doesn't factor in the duplicates. So one variant might then be copied 800 times. It's really only one variant, but then that manuscript in which that variant happened was then copied 800 times, and it can be traced back to that one variant. The actual problems amongst those 400,000 variants actually boil down to only 10,000. So that's about 31.7% of the words in the New Testament have some kind of variation if you look at different manuscripts. So if we look at it in terms of percentages, so out of this, there are spelling mistakes that are clearly just a spelling mistake made by the scribe and variants, and nonsense readings where obviously the scribe has written what they've written isn't actually a word, and it's very clearly they've just made, put a letter wrong, and it's very clearly, it's Bob instead of Bobby or something. So 300,000 of these variants are very clearly just human error in making a spelling mistake. Stylistic variants, so in Greek, the order of the words isn't as important as it might be in English. So the same sentence could be written with the words in different order, maybe 8 or 9 different ways, and the sentence would still mean exactly the same thing. Definite articles, sometimes there's a the, sometimes there isn't, but it doesn't make any difference to the meaning. Or singular readings, where out of all of the manuscripts, there's only one that has this particular reading, and it's a late manuscript, so it's very clearly not from the original. So 96,000 of them. Meaningful but unviable variants means where a variation does actually change the meaning of the sentence that it's in, but it's unviable in that, again, it might be a very late manuscript, it might be 2 or 3 of this particular version compared to 300 of something else. So it's very clear that even though the meaning it does make sense and it changes the meaning slightly, it's not considered to be authentic or original. So the number of meaningful and viable variants is 400. So in other words, the number of variants that scholars and translators of the Bible have to sit down and say, okay, we need to make a decision here. Are we going to go with that one or with that one? And that means meaningful and viable. So 400 out of the 400,000 are actually ones that scholars have to think about and work out. Yeah, so if you turn to 1 John 1, you'll see an example of this. 1 John chapter 1. 1 John comes just before 2 John, just after Peter, just after 2 Peter. Whoever finds it first, if you could read it out for us. Okay, and see there's a little superscript 1 next to our, and the footnote says some manuscripts your. Okay, so scholars have said, okay, well, the sentence makes sense, doesn't it? We're writing these things so that our joy may be complete, or so that your joy may be complete. Both of them make sense. But it doesn't change the thrust of the whole chapter, and it doesn't change Christian doctrine, doesn't it? Does it? Whether it's our joy or your joy, but scholars are unable to say for absolute sure. We know that the manuscripts that say our joy is the original, so they've gone with the one that they believe is the most likely one, but they've been open and transparent and given us a footnote, and that's the difference between Christian Bible scholarship and, for example, Islamic Quran scholarship. And Muslim will say to you, the Quran has been preserved exactly word for word from when Muhammad gave it. And they say there have been no changes, there have been no mistakes, no textual variants. But in actual fact, there are versions of the Quran that have textual variations. In the same way as this, not as many as in the New Testament, but that's only because there are only about 10 ancient manuscripts of the Quran historically, whereas we have 25,000 ancient manuscripts from the New Testament. So actually, the fact we have so many, there are more ancient copies of the scriptures than there are of any other ancient document out of all of history. And so, of course, there are going to be more variations, but the more documents we have, the more certainty we have, which we'll see now. So the variants that actually change or confuse key Christian doctrines are zero, right? So they're variants like this. That doesn't actually change the thrust or the essential meaning of the verse. Very reliable. So how was the Bible really passed down? Well, there were the originals, and very, very soon after the originals were written, very soon after Paul wrote his letters to the churches, for example, people would have started copying them out to pass them on, to distribute them, either amongst people within their church community or to the wider Christian community. So copies were made with some slight variations, and then multiple copies. So more and more copies were made, and then it keeps going, and some of them might be fairly close to the original, some might be slightly different. And so what we then have is thousands of parallel copies. So there are Christians up in Rome making copies, and there are Christians down in Alexandria in Egypt making copies, and other Christians over in Persia making copies. So it's not a single chain. So it's not that I whisper a message to Russell and it gets passed on one by one. It's I give you all the message, and then you all write down what I said, and most of you will get it pretty much what I said. One of you might make a few small changes or mistakes.
The difference is really big when it comes to translations. If there are parallel translations into Latin or other languages.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so this is just thinking primarily of the Greek manuscripts, but Bible scholars also use the Latin and the other languages too in determining what the original is. So what we end up then with today is 25,000 copies of New Testament documents. And not only that, but there are ongoing archaeological and scholarly discoveries. So that 25,000 number, I think when I presented this a little bit earlier when we were doing biblical hermeneutics, I think it was like 23,000. So just in the space of a few years, more manuscripts have been uncovered and discovered, hidden away in monasteries or churches or museums. So there's this ongoing discovery of even more manuscripts and more archaeological things that actually give extra biblical backing to what is written. And we also have multi-denominational and multidisciplinary cooperation. So unlike the popular imagination that says Christians are always fighting against each other and trying to change things, the reality is most of our modern Bible translations are worked on by scholars from many different denominations right across Christendom, whether it's Protestant, Evangelical, Orthodox and so on. And they employ linguists and archaeologists and historians and others to work on it. So what we then end up then with in our modern Bible is that we're actually able to know 99.5%, and that's growing, that we can be sure is what was written when Paul sat down with his pen or with his scribe with his pen and actually wrote his letters, for example. So we can trust the transmission, the veracity of the document we have today, that it is accurate to what was written back then.